The Al Marjan Palace shimmered like a vision carved from the desert's own dreams, its ivory walls rising against the pale horizon where the dunes met the sky. From the street beyond its gates, the call to prayer drifted in soft waves, mingling with the faint fragrance of oud incense that clung to the palace corridors. Inside, silence reigned, the cultivated kind of silence that only the wealthiest households could command. Here, footsteps softened themselves against marble in respect. Conversations shrank to whispers under the domed ceilings, and every servant learned that their presence was to be felt only in the perfection of the spaces they left behind. Samira Zara moved through this silence with the ease of someone who had learned to become invisible. Her black abaya brushed soundlessly against the patterned tiles as she pushed her cart of cleaning supplies along the private wing reserved for the royal family. Her hands, small and steady, were the hands of a woman used to observing the smallest changes in a room or in a person. Pinned discreetly to the inside fold of her abaya was a small silver brooch, its enamel slightly chipped, a relic from her past life as a student of medicine. She had left the nursing school on the very day they buried her mother, a woman of quiet authority in their desert tribe, whose skill as a healer had saved countless lives, but not her own. Her mother's voice still lived in Samira's memory, softer than the desert wind at dusk. "Habibti, you do not need royal robes or a doctor's coat to save a life." That morning, a route brought her to the suite of His Highness, Prince Rashid Al Maktoum, heir to the House of Maktoum, builder of a medical technology empire that stretched from the Gulf to Europe. His software had transformed hospital systems across continents, yet here he was, secluded in his private palace on the outskirts of Abu Dhabi, avoiding the sharp teeth of the press and the shadow of legal battles that questioned his judgment. To him, Samira was just another shadow in the palace corridors. He did not see the woman, only the work. The line between their worlds was clear. He commanded, she obeyed. His words mattered, hers did not. That was until she noticed the mark. It was while she was replacing the linens in his private majlis, the morning light filtering through carved mashrabiyah screens and throwing golden patterns over the marble floor. Rashid had stepped out briefly, leaving his bisht draped over the arm of a chair. Her gaze, drawn by habit to every detail, caught on the edge of his white thobe, where it rode up slightly at the calf. There, against the warm bronze of his skin, bloomed a red ring with a pale center, like the ones her mother had once shown her in illustrated medical scrolls. A sign that the nomadic tribes called the desert's hidden sting, a bite whose poison could creep silently through the body until it reached the heart and mind. Her fingers tightened around the folded linen. Samira knew what it meant. She also knew that in the palace hierarchy, a servant's voice about matters of health was less than nothing, a whisper in the desert wind, lost before it reached the ears of those who could act. 3 days passed, each one marked by the subtle, troubling changes she saw in him. His usually measured stride became cautious. His eyes, sharp as a falcon's, grew clouded with fatigue. The hands that once signed contracts worth fortunes now trembled slightly when lifting the small finjan of coffee. In the library, a grand domed chamber scented with leather and the faint sweetness of jasmine from the gardens, she noticed abandoned cups of kahwa scattered on side tables, forgotten mid-sip. Books lay open but unread, pages gathering a fine veil of dust. He would sit before his laptop for hours, the golden lamplight falling over his face as he stared into nothing. Then came the arrival of Dr. Tarek Safar. The palace gates opened to admit a black Mercedes whose polished surface mirrored the white domes above. "Doctor?" Tarek emerged with the confidence of a man accustomed to authority, his bisht embroidered with threads of gold, the glint of a fountain spray catching in his silver beard. He had been the family's physician for decades, his word in medical matters treated as final. Samira was arranging a row of glass lanterns in the hallway when he passed, his leather sandals clicking against the marble. The air shifted around him, not with humility, but with the weight of deference the palace gave to those whose status outranked all but the royal blood itself. She did not mean to overhear their conversation, but the majlis doors had been left ajar, and Dr. Tarek's voice carried with the resonance of someone unused to being questioned. "Your Highness, it is merely exhaustion. A season of litigation would weary even the strongest falcon. But my joints ache, and I lose my thoughts mid-sentence," Rashid replied, the edge of frustration in his tone. "The mind is powerful, Tarek countered. "And the palace has been your cage these months. What you feel is the echo of stress, nothing more." Samira's hands froze over the lantern she was polishing. These were the same words her mother had heard from city doctors before they misdiagnosed her, the same dismissal that had cost her life. As she stepped back into the corridor's cool shadows, the scent of oud was heavy in the air, mingling with something else, the bitter taste of helplessness rising in her throat. That evening, the library was empty except for the warm pools of light cast by its bronze lanterns. Samira entered quietly, carrying a stack of freshly bound ledgers for the palace archives. She did not expect to find Rashid there, seated in the high-backed leather chair near the window. His posture, usually unshakable, seemed folded inward. The pale light from the courtyard fountains painted shifting patterns across his face. When his gaze lifted, it was not the absent glance she had grown used to. It was direct, measured. His voice was low, carrying the gravel of fatigue. She nodded, surprised he knew her name at all. In the palace, she was addressed most often as girl or with a silent gesture. Samira hesitated. The distance between their stations was a chasm. Words spoken here could echo in ways that could not be recalled. "My mother was a healer," she said finally, her voice careful. 5 years now, Samira confirmed. They said she had a simple fever. It was not. The quiet that followed was heavy but not empty. Rashid's gaze sharpened, as if something in her answer had struck an unspoken chord. She drew in a slow breath. "I could not save her." Her eyes flicked up, just for a moment, meeting his. There was a pause, a faint shift in the air between them. The words unsettled something in her chest, the way a sudden breeze disturbs the still surface of a fountain. The next morning brought changes too distinct to be dismissed as mere fatigue. Rashid's left hand trembled more openly, the slightest slur bending the edges of his words. Samira, with the silent discipline of a servant, observed everything. The uneven lines in his handwritten notes, the unfinished thoughts scattered across parchment, the way his coffee cooled untouched. When Dr. Tarek returned that afternoon, his tone was even more dismissive. Samira lingered in the corridor outside the majlis, her cart positioned near enough to catch their voices. "Your Highness, this is stress, nothing more. Perhaps mild anxiety from the strain of recent events." "Yesterday I forgot my own private seal code," Rashid said, his frustration now cutting through. "You are a leader, not a physician," Tarek replied smoothly. "Leave the diagnosis to those who have studied the art." Samira gripped the handle of her cart until her knuckles whitened. She had heard this voice before, the voice that cloaked ignorance in authority, that valued titles above truth. That night, in her small room above the service courtyard, she pulled her mother's worn leather satchel from its place beneath her bed. Inside were the tools of a healer, a stethoscope, a mercury thermometer, a penlight whose beam was still sharp, a few scrolls of medical diagrams preserved in clear parchment. She traced her fingers over them, each one a fragment of a life she had locked away. She read until the call to the final prayer drifted over the palace walls. Every sign, every symptom pointed toward the same danger, and every hour that passed narrowed the space between warning and catastrophe. The next morning, a folded note appeared on the low wooden table in Rashid's private chamber. Its calligraphy was precise, the ink dark against ivory parchment. "Test for the desert's hidden sting. Early signs are treatable. Delay invites the heart and mind to suffer." Rashid read it more than once, the faint scent of ink and paper rising with each breath. His fingers lingered on the curves of the letters, sensing the deliberate hand behind them. When Dr. Tarek saw it, he laughed softly, the kind of laugh meant to close a door. "Your Highness, this is nothing more than superstition dressed in poetry." That night, the wind from the desert carried with it a fine mist of sand, settling over the marble courtyards like a thin veil. Samira moved through the quiet corridors, her abaya brushing against the cool stone. In the east garden, the fountains whispered in the starlight. Somewhere beyond the walls, a falcon cried, a sharp, lonely sound that pierced the stillness. In her heart, she knew the storm was coming. The first blush of dawn crept over Al Marjan Palace like a silken veil being drawn back by unseen hands. A soft copper light slid across the domes, catching on the golden crescents at their peaks, then spilling down into courtyards where palm shadows lay long and still. The air carried the layered fragrances of the Gulf morning, jasmine from the inner gardens, the faint spice of cardamom drifting from the kitchens, and the saline ghost of the sea beyond the palace walls. The marble underfoot seemed to glow from within, its polished veins reflecting the rose-tinted sky. The fountains murmured in low conversation, each ripple scattering points of sunlight across carved stone basins. Somewhere deeper in the complex, the call to prayer unfurled, the muezzin's voice rising and folding back into silence like a blessing caught in the folds of a robe. In the private wing, everything was arranged to preserve stillness, the heavy velvet drapes filtering light into gold dust, the carved arches framing corridors like promises no one dared to break. And then, the stillness cracked. It was not a shattering sound, not a cry or a fall. It was smaller, stranger. The muted scrape of a hand against marble, the irregular rhythm of breath that had forgotten how to keep time. Samira, bent over a neat stack of towels in the prince's bath antechamber, felt it before she fully heard it. It was the way the air shifted, the way the moment leaned suddenly forward. She turned. Through the open arch, she saw him. Rashid, always precise, always in command of his own body, was leaning heavily on the wall, his right hand braced, but his left arm hanging oddly slack. The left side of his face was different, as though some invisible hand had gently unstitched its symmetry. His mouth pulled rightward in a reluctant curve, his left eyelid slower to follow his will. Her body moved before her thoughts caught up. 3 swift, noiseless steps carried her across the mosaic floor. The patterns beneath her feet, turquoise, gold, ivory, blurred as she reached him. She guided him down to the cushioned bench along the wall, the cool silk of the upholstery whispering beneath his weight. Her fingertips sought his pulse, fast, urgent, and then tested his grip. The right hand answered firmly, the left struggled, trembling, as if the message from brain to muscle had been written in a language it no longer understood. She catalogued the signs with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. Facial asymmetry, unilateral weakness, delayed blink, recent rash. The rash. She had seen it days ago, a perfect red ring on his calf, the kind of mark that stayed in the mind long after the eyes had turned away. The arithmetic of danger resolved itself instantly. Her voice, when it came, was calm as water poured into glass. "In a bath of the prince's suite," she told the palace's private emergency line. Facial asymmetry, left-sided weakness, slurred speech, erythematous rash on left calf 4 days ago. They arrived in less than 2 minutes. 3 paramedics in spotless white dish dashes, their medical cases gleaming, and behind them, Dr. Layla Farouk, compact, sharp-eyed. Her presence was like the moment a falcon's hood is lifted, stillness turning instantly into precision. She examined Rashid quickly, rolling the hem of his thobe just enough to reveal the fading bullseye rash. Her gaze hardened. "Stage 2, she murmured. The gurney's wheels hummed softly over the marble. Guards moved ahead of them, opening doors a fraction of a second before they arrived, the air in the corridors shifting with their passing. Outside, the ambulance waited, its rear doors open wide like the wings of a bird about to take flight. Inside, the air changed from perfume to oxygen. The Gulf morning streamed past the small windows, white domed mosques glowing in the rising sun, glass towers bending light like water, palm fronds tracing green calligraphy against a sky deepening toward blue. The siren didn't scream, it sang, a long, low note that carried urgency without panic. At Sheikh Zayed Medical City, everything moved with the choreography of practiced urgency. Machines hummed, screens flickered, vials filled with blood that would soon tell their truth. The MRI swallowed Rashid whole, the rhythmic thrum of its magnet sounding almost like a distant drumbeat. When the results came back, they spoke without softness. A nervous system infection, advanced enough to threaten lasting damage. Had this waited longer, Dr. Rashid's gaze shifted to Dr. Tarek, who stood at the edge of the room. His authority wilted. Rashid's voice was quiet, but final. That evening, the palace seemed to hum with whispers, as if the very walls were telling the story in low tones. In the staff parking lot, Samira sat with her resignation letter folded into a perfect rectangle. Her supervisor stood near, hands behind his back. Headlights swept the lot. Rashid approached, still in hospital tunic, his gait slow but steady. The white cotton caught the light, the faint scent of antiseptic following him. "Don't go," he said, not as a command, but as a request. "You're safe now." "No, Samira. You saved my life while I treated you as invisible. You are someone who sees what others miss," he said simply. In the days that followed, recovery came in fragments. A step taken without hesitation, a glass lifted without tremor, a sentence spoken without faltering. Evenings belonged to the library, where her mother's medical scrolls lay open on the carved wooden table. Rashid spoke of how he had once confused rank with wisdom, and how his vision was changing. In the palace, the whispers began to turn in her favor. Servants greeted her with subtle nods that carried respect. And one night, as desert wind moved through the east colonnade, and the lanterns painted the marble in rubies and emeralds, she pinned her mother's silver brooch inside her abaya, the same she had worn the day she saw the rash. The council would soon meet to discuss his health and succession, and in her heart, she knew. She was no longer standing at the edge of the room. She was already in it. The days following Rashid's return to the palace carried a subtle shift, like a string in an oud tuned ever so slightly higher. Outwardly, the rhythms remained unchanged. Dawn prayers, the aroma of fresh kawa drifting through the courtyards, fountains murmuring under the filtered light of colonnades. But beneath the familiar cadence was a quiet current that even the least observant could feel. Servants who had once passed Samira with unseeing eyes now offered faint nods, their glances holding the briefest spark of recognition. In the great kitchens, where the air was heavy with cinnamon and roasting lamb, conversations hushed as she entered. In the laundry courtyards, women bent over steaming copper basins, paused their hands for a heartbeat before resuming. The change was small, but unmistakable, the way wind shifts just before a desert storm. In the prince's private suite, recovery unfolded with the grace of ritual. Each morning, the silk drapes were drawn back to reveal the city's skyline. Mosques domed in white and gold, towers catching the sun like shards of crystal. The rooms themselves seemed softer now. Where once there had been only precision and order, there was space for stillness. Rashid moved with deliberate care, as if relearning the balance between his body and the world around him. One morning, Samira entered carrying a silver tray. Steam curled from a brass dalla of kahwa, its scent of cardamom and cloves filling the air. Dates stuffed with almonds rested beside a shallow bowl of golden honey. She set the tray down on a low table inlaid with turquoise and mother of pearl, its patterns catching the light like water. "You walk more steadily today," she said, pouring the coffee into a small finjan. A faint smile curved his lips. She replied, her tone even. He regarded her over the rim of the cup, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes deepening. "When I was in the hospital," he said slowly, "I realized how much of my life is arranged to protect me from hearing the truth." She did not answer, but the weight of that day in the bath chamber hung between them like a suspended lantern, its light reaching both their faces. Later that afternoon, a messenger arrived, not one of the usual attendants, but the chief chamberlain himself. Samira was summoned to the Majlis al-Saghir, the smaller council chamber of the palace. It was a place of decisions, though few outside the ruling family ever set foot inside. She followed him through narrow corridors until they opened into a space of hushed grandeur. The chamber was an intimate jewel box, a domed ceiling painted in deep lapis and dusted with gold stars, walls lined with shelves of ancient scrolls and illuminated manuscripts. A small fountain sang in the center, its water casting ripples of reflected light across the onyx and mother-of-pearl floor. Rashid was there, but not on the elevated seat of authority. Instead, he sat at a low, round table, dressed in a simple white thobe, with a gold-trimmed bisht draped loosely over his shoulders. To his right sat Sheikh Mansour, his uncle, and a figure of unbending tradition. To his left, Lady Hana bint Saif, his cousin, renowned for her charm and rumored to be the most skilled political player in the family's inner circle. "I have asked Samira Zara to join us," Rashid said without preamble, his tone calm yet edged with the certainty of a man who had already decided. "Her observations and swift actions saved my life." Lady Hana's brows lifted, her lips curving into a smile that did not touch her eyes. "An advisor? This is unconventional." "She has knowledge and perspective that others lacked," Rashid replied evenly. "She speaks when she knows she is right." even if it risks her place. Mansour's gaze was harder to read, dark eyes shifting from Rashid to Samira, weighing her like a merchant assessing rare spice. "And what of the physicians on your payroll?" Rashid's jaw tightened. The silence that followed was sharp, the fountain's soft song the only sound in the chamber. Finally, Lady Hana inclined her head in acquiescence, though the steel in her expression remained. When the meeting ended, Rashid rose and walked her to the chamber's carved cedar doors himself, a gesture noticed by the guards posted there. His voice dropped as they stepped into the hallway. "This will not be simple," he murmured. That night, in her modest quarters tucked in the older wing of the palace, Samira unpinned her mother's silver brooch and set it beside the rolled parchment of medical notes she kept wrapped in linen. Outside her window, the desert wind moved through the date palms, with a sound like slow, deliberate applause. Somewhere deep within the palace, the council's whispers had already begun to shift, the story of the servant who had stepped into the room where power breathed. And Samira knew, without the faintest trace of doubt, that this was only the beginning of the true test her courage would face. The air in the palace had shifted again, almost imperceptibly, like the change in scent before the desert sky bursts into a sandstorm. The quiet nods and murmurs of respect that had begun to greet Samira after Rashid's recovery were now tinged with something heavier, watchfulness. It trailed her through marble corridors and shaded courtyards, a silent escort of suspicion. In the grand hallway that led toward the council wing, the scent of oud incense lay thick, mingling with the faint metallic tang of polished brass lanterns. Courtiers moved in careful formations of 2 and 3, their words wrapped in silken tones, but carrying the sharp edge of a dagger just beneath. Some acknowledged her with a subtle tilt of the head, others with a smile so fleeting it seemed to vanish before it began. It was not coldness, but a testing, measuring her, weighing her, deciding whether she was an anomaly to be ignored or a threat to be contained. That morning, Rashid summoned her to his private study. The room was an enclave of dark cedar and deep-colored carpets, where tall windows opened onto the palace gardens beyond. Through the lattice, the cry of a falcon from the royal aviary cut through the air, high and piercing. He was at his desk, papers and scrolls spread before him, the wax seals of the royal council glinting in the light. His thobe was simple, the gold embroidery of his bisht catching only the faintest gleam. He didn't look up as he spoke. Samira clasped her hands before her, choosing her words with care. He raised his gaze slowly, and in the stillness between them, she felt the weight of his attention, like the heat of the sun before noon. "You are needed." Before she could reply, a gentle knock preceded the entrance of Lady Hana bint Saif. She wore silk the color of deep pomegranate, her hair framed with a delicate circlet of gold. Her steps were measured, her poise unshakable, the kind of presence that filled a room without effort. "Your Highness," she began, her voice like velvet stretched taut. "I came only to offer counsel. Our court runs on traditions older than the marble beneath our feet." Rashid's tone was calm, but resolute. Hana's gaze slid towards Samira, lingering for a breath that felt longer than it was. The smile she offered afterward was polite, almost warm, but her eyes gave away nothing. She bowed her head slightly and withdrew, the faint fragrance of rosewater trailing in her wake. When the door closed, Rashid leaned back in his chair. "She is not your enemy by nature, Samira, but by position." Later, seeking a place where her thoughts could breathe, Samira walked to the palace gardens. She chose the date grove, where tall palms cast moving shadows, and the air was cooler, carrying the scent of ripe fruit and earth. The fountains there whispered softly, their music folding into the hum of bees that hovered over blooming jasmine. She sat on the low stone edge of the largest fountain, her reflection trembling in the water. For the first time since the morning she had noticed Rashid's illness, doubt pressed against her chest. Could truth survive in a place where alliances were forged in whispers and broken with a single glance? Her mother's voice seemed to echo faintly in her mind. Truth above pride, action above fear. A voice broke her reverie. She turned. Sheikh Mansour stood in the shade of a palm, his white beard bright in the dappled light. His eyes were dark and deep, not unkind but sharp as the edge of a falcon's talon. He asked. "Because I was not chosen by them," she replied. He shook his head once. "Because you were chosen by him." Before she could answer, he inclined his head in a brief farewell and walked away. his steps unhurried, his robe whispering over the tiled path. That evening, a summons arrived from Rashid, not for council business, but for a private dinner in the East Wing. The room was intimate, with low ceilings painted in deep blues and gold leaf. Lanterns cast patterned shadows on the marble, and the scent of saffron and grilled lamb filled the air. They spoke in low voices between courses, thin slices of lamb marinated in pomegranate, saffron rice fragrant with cinnamon, honey-soaked pastries served with steaming mint tea. "They will test you," Rashid said, his gaze steady. "Not to see if you fail, but to show the court that you can be made to bow." Beyond the latticed windows, the desert wind whispered against the palace walls, carrying the faint scent of night-blooming jasmine. And Samira knew with a clarity as sharp as moonlight on sand, the first battle had already begun. The evening of the royal charity banquet was a tapestry of light and sound. The great courtyard of Al Marjan Palace had been transformed into a garden of lanterns, hundreds of glass globes in amber, emerald, and sapphire hanging from carved wooden arches. The air shimmered with the scent of oud and frankincense, the fragrance carried on a warm desert breeze that stirred the silk drapes lining the periphery. Guests arrived in a slow, glittering procession. Ministers in gold-threaded bishts, foreign dignitaries in tailored suits, and the city's elite women draped in abayas embroidered with pearls. Musicians in the far colonnade played the Kanunan Ney, their music weaving through the laughter and soft clinking of crystal. Samira was not expected to be in the center of this gathering. Her new position had not yet been formally recognized by the council, and her presence at such an event was, at best, controversial. But Rashid had sent for her personally. When she arrived, the ripple of reaction was immediate, glances darting between her and the prince, quiet conversations pausing mid-sentence. She wore an abaya of deep midnight blue, the silver brooch pinned at her shoulder catching the lantern light. It was during the third course, as servers moved among the guests with trays of saffron lamb, that the sabotage revealed itself. A dignitary from a neighboring emirate, an older man with rings on every finger, stood and, with a genial smile that didn't reach his eyes, addressed Rashid. "Your Highness," he said, "I have heard much of the young woman who saved your life." A polite murmur rippled through the crowd, but Samira caught the undercurrent. This was no genuine request. It was a trap designed to place her in a role of servitude in front of the court, to reduce her from advisor to spectacle. Rashid's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Samira inclined her head with a serene smile. "It would be my honor," she said, her voice carrying enough for the guests to hear. She turned not to the dignitary, but to a young boy standing near the fountain, one of the palace's junior attendants, no more than 12, whose limp had gone unnoticed all evening. Kneeling gracefully, she asked the boy's permission before examining his foot, then addressed the crowd. "In our tradition," she began, "healing is not only for the body, but for the dignity of the person." She explained the boy's condition, a treatable strain from an old injury, and called for a specific herbal poultice from the palace infirmary. Her tone was instructional, her words precise, but never condescending. In a few moments, the boy's foot was wrapped, and she had thanked him for trusting her. When she stood again, the room's energy had shifted. The dignitary's smile had thinned, while murmurs of approval moved through the guests. Lady Hannah, watching from across the courtyard, raised a single brow, less in disapproval than in reluctant acknowledgement. Later, as the guests drifted toward the dessert tables, Rashid came to her side. "You turned their game against them," he said quietly. "I only remembered what my mother taught me," Samira replied. From the corner of her eye, she caught Sheikh Mansour watching her, his expression unreadable. Yet something told her that tonight, she had earned a measure of respect she could not have demanded. The music swelled, the lanterns swayed in the night breeze, and Samira knew this would not be the last attempt to diminish her. But she had also learned that every challenge was a stage, if one knew how to choose the script. The days following the banquet were steeped in a subtle but undeniable shift. It was not the kind of change announced by proclamations or grand gestures. It was quieter, felt in glances and pauses, in the way footsteps slowed as she passed. The palace breathed differently now. In the early mornings, as Samira crossed the inner courtyard toward the physician's wing, she noticed the guards at the carved cedar gates offering her the faintest shadow of a nod. The kitchen attendants, once brisk and inattentive, now greeted her with murmured "Sabah al-Khair." Even among the courtiers, whose words were always wrapped in silk to hide the edge of the blade beneath, there was a change in tone. Some still looked past her, but others met her gaze with a new calculation, measuring, weighing, adjusting their stance as if sensing a shift in the desert wind. Not all welcomed the change. The dignitary who had sought to embarrass her at the banquet avoided her with studied indifference. Lady Hannah's watchful eyes remained constant, like the steady flame of a lamp that refused to be extinguished. But the whispers in the corridors no longer carried only scandal. They now carried a kind of reluctant respect. On the third day, she received an unexpected summons to the library. The messenger spoke softly, as though the words themselves might change if overheard. The library of Al Marjan Palace was a sanctuary of quiet grandeur. High arches framed stained glass windows, and the afternoon light spilled across long tables in jeweled fragments. The air smelled of parchment, cedar oil, and the faint musk of age-old leather bindings. Samira's footsteps were hushed by Persian rugs, woven in deep reds and golds. At the far end of the room, seated at a table beneath a shaft of light from the clear-story windows, was Sheikh Mansour. His presence was like that of the old desert itself, enduring, patient, and unreadable. "You handled yourself well at the banquet," he said, his voice low but carrying. Samira inclined her head slightly. "Necessary," he echoed, leaning back in his chair. "Yes, but you also did something more. You reminded them that mercy and dignity are not signs of weakness." She said nothing, letting the silence stretch between them. "You should know," Mansour continued, lowering his voice further, "that the council's next session will decide more than your future. There are those who believe Rashid's illness has weakened him, not only in body, but in judgment." The words landed like fine desert dust, light, but with the power to obscure the horizon. She asked quietly. He studied her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I believe the desert rewards those who read its signs before the storm arrives. I also believe that loyalty, placed wisely, is worth more than gold or titles." It was not a threat, not exactly, but an invitation to prove herself. That evening, she met Rashid in the private garden of the East Wing. The scent of night-blooming jasmine hung heavy in the air, mixing with the faint salt of the sea carried inland by the wind. The garden's fountain murmured softly, its surface glinting in the lantern light. Rashid sat on a low stone bench carved with verses from old Bedouin poetry. She recounted her meeting with Mansour in detail. He listened without interrupting, his fingers absently tracing the edge of a brass coffee cup. "He is testing you," Rashid said finally. "He will not stand for you openly." "Not yet." Samira gazed at the rippling fountain. The evening call to prayer drifted across the city, carried on the wind like a thread of gold. As she listened, Samira understood something vital. Her survival here would not depend on avoiding enemies. It would depend on making them decide whether to oppose her or to walk beside her, because in this palace, neutrality was an illusion. The morning of the council session arrived, with a peculiar stillness, the kind that does not soothe but unsettles. It was as though the entire palace, from the marble floors to the high minarets, was holding its breath. Even the muezzin's call to prayer seemed softer, as if the very air understood that the true reckoning of the day would not be with God, but with men who believed themselves his instruments. Samira rose before dawn. She chose her attire deliberately, a deep green abaya, the shade of palm leaves after rare desert rain, embroidered at the cuffs with silver vines. The silver brooch her mother had left her was fastened high at her shoulder, a quiet declaration that her origins were not something to be hidden. She braided her hair neatly beneath her headscarf, every motion calm, controlled, though the awareness of what was to come pulsed like a second heartbeat in her chest. The council chamber was a monument to authority. The vaulted ceiling soared overhead, painted with sprawling scenes of caravans crossing golden dunes under crescent moons. Sunlight spilled through stained glass windows, scattering jewel-toned patterns across a floor of lapis and white marble, arranged in star-like geometry. The air smelled faintly of oud and polished cedar, layered with the subtle tang of metal from the gilded lanterns. At the center of the room stood a long oval table of polished cedar, its surface gleaming under the light. Each high-backed chair bore the carved crest of the ruling family, worn smooth by generations of hands. Around the table, the council members had already begun to gather, their silks rustling, voices low. When Rashid entered with Samira at his side, conversations faltered, then shifted into a murmur just loud enough to be heard without words being distinct. Sheikh Mansour sat near the head of the table, his posture deceptively relaxed, his hands folded as though this were any other day. Lady Hana stood by the far window, her figure framed by colored glass, speaking quietly to a counselor whose turban was set with a ruby, large enough to catch every flicker of light. The session opened with tradition, the formal recitation of the family's lineage, spoken by the eldest counselor, in a voice like gravel smoothed by time. The names rolled on like an incantation, each one a reminder that decisions made here would be etched into the history of a dynasty centuries old. Then the floor opened. "She has no official rank," one counselor said, his tone smooth but edged with disdain. "No blood tie to the family, no sanctioned role." Rashid's voice was calm, measured, yet it carried the weight of command. "When my life hung by a thread, she acted without hesitation while others debated." Lady Hana moved forward then, the folds of her gown whispering against the marble. Her gaze was unwavering, her smile polite but sharp. "And yet, cousin, one act of courage does not undo a lifetime of obscurity. Influence is not given freely. It must be earned, and more importantly, it must be recognized by those it will touch. Tell me, Samira." Her eyes locked on hers, the air between them taut. The room grew still. Samira stepped forward, every movement deliberate. Her voice, when it came, was steady but warm, carrying without force. "I do not claim equality with the rulers of this court," she said. "My duty is not to rule, but to serve. But service without a voice is only obedience, and obedience without thought serves no one. Not the people, not the family, and not the traditions we are entrusted to honor." The silence that followed was heavy, layered. Some counselors exchanged quick, almost imperceptible glances. Others studied her with new interest, as if recalibrating their assumptions. It was Sheikh Mansour who spoke next, his tone slow and deliberate. "Perhaps," he said, "the council fears the wrong danger. A voice that speaks truth may be inconvenient." "Yes." The ripple of reaction was immediate, subtle though it was. A few heads inclined slightly in Mansour's direction. Others stiffened. When the vote came, it was closer than anyone had predicted. The result was not a full victory. Samira was not granted the formal title of advisor, but neither was she removed from Rashid's side. It was a compromise, and in the unspoken language of the court, it was both a foothold and a warning. As they exited into the courtyard, sunlight blazing against the white palace walls, Rashid leaned toward her. His voice was quiet, for her alone. "You were heard today," he said. "Not embraced, perhaps, but heard." Samira let the heat of the sun seep into her skin, steadying herself. The ground beneath her might still shift at any moment, but she knew now. Roots could take hold even in the most treacherous sand. The decision of the council had barely dissipated from the vaulted chamber before the undercurrent of the palace began to shift. It was the kind of change invisible to the untrained eye, yet unmistakable to anyone who had learned to listen to the silences between footsteps. The marble halls seemed the same. The golden lanterns burned as they always had, but the air had altered, denser, charged, as though every archway now sheltered an unseen listener. In the galleries, servants crossed paths with the subtle awareness of people carrying knowledge too dangerous to speak aloud. A kitchen attendant would pause mid-step, eyes darting toward a shadow, then move on as though nothing had happened. Pages carrying tightly rolled scrolls hugged them close to their chests, as if the vellum itself radiated heat. The guards in the inner courtyard held their disciplined stillness, but their gazes were more deliberate, tracking faces with the precision of men who had been given quiet orders. Samira felt all of it as she walked. She knew this was the ripple effect of the council's half-measure, a decision that had neither banished her nor embraced her, leaving her poised in the narrow space between survival and expulsion. In the desert, such precarious footing could collapse with the wrong wind. By mid-afternoon, the sunlight pressed down with blinding force, making the white marble of the palace gleam like bone under a merciless sky. Seeking shade, she turned toward the western colonnade, where the breeze from the garden carried the scent of blooming jasmine. There, as though he had been waiting for her all along, stood Sheikh Mansour. He was draped in a dark bisht, its folds whispering faintly when he shifted, and his hand rested on the carved head of an ebony walking stick. She suspected the cane was less a necessity and more a reminder of heritage, its design echoing the artistry of an older era. "You held your ground," he said without greeting, his voice like the slow settling of sand after a storm. "I stood because retreat would have been erasure," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. A flicker of something, approval perhaps, or calculation, touched his expression. "The Council respects strength more than loyalty, and the appearance of certainty more than the truth itself. But strength is not only what you display in the chamber, it is what you construct when the eyes of the court are elsewhere." Her eyes narrowed slightly. He regarded her for a moment before answering. "Both." Before she could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps broke the stillness. 2 kitchen servants raced across the far end of the courtyard, headscarves slipping, eyes wide. From somewhere beyond the eastern arches came a metallic crash, followed by a sharp cry muffled by walls. Samira moved instinctively, her pace brisk but measured. The scent reached her even before she stepped into the small, private kitchen reserved for the prince's meals, a fragrant steam of saffron, cinnamon, and cardamom, rich and inviting. Yet beneath it lay an acrid bitterness that caught in the back of the throat. The scene was chaos. A copper pot, large enough to feed 10, lay on its side, golden broth flooding the tiles in a spreading pool. The intricate mosaic floor, blue and ivory stars set in marble, was stained a dull ochre. A boy, scarcely 15, cradled his wrist, skin reddened from the scalding spill, his face pale with shock. The head cook, her voice tight, stepped forward. "It was for His Highness's dinner," she whispered. "Someone altered it." Samira crouched, careful to keep her skirt from the spill, and lowered her face to the surface of the broth. She did not taste, only inhaled, a practiced caution from her childhood. The bitterness was there, tucked beneath the perfume of the dish, a deadly note hiding in the melody. Her voice was clear and steady. "Shut the kitchen, now. No one leaves. No one enters until I say so. Send for the palace physician. The broth is not to be moved or touched." A shadow lengthened in the doorway. Rashid stood there, framed in the amber glow of the lanterns, his expression like carved stone. His eyes swept the room, boy, cook, pot, before fixing on her. "They waste no time," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "They chose the kitchen for a reason," she answered, rising to meet him. "It is not only you they mean to strike." Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the invisible line now drawn. Rashid's gaze sharpened. The injured boy was led away, the kitchen sealed under guard. Outside, the palace's rhythm resumed, as if nothing had happened. But Samira knew the message had already been delivered. This was no longer a game of influence. It was a test of survival, one where hesitation could be fatal. And in this world, survival did not belong to those who were merely strong. It belonged to those who could see into every shadow, trace it to its source, and choose precisely when to drag the figure casting it into the light. The sealed kitchen had the oppressive weight of a chamber holding its breath. Even the sound of the lantern flames seemed louder, each flicker casting ripples of light across the polished marble. Guards stood at the only door, tall, motionless figures in dark bishts trimmed with gold thread, their spears reflecting amber light. They did not move, yet their presence pressed against the room like a second set of walls. The aroma of saffron and cinnamon still lingered, wrapping itself around the senses with deceptive warmth. But beneath it was the truth, an acrid bitterness that curled through the air like a whispered threat. The injured boy sat hunched on a stool, his face pale, his wrist wrapped in damp linen that darkened with cooling water. His eyes avoided everyone, fixed instead on the mosaic stars beneath his feet, as though they might reveal a way out of this moment. The head cook stood near the overturned copper pot, hands clasped so tightly that the veins stood out in her knuckles. She did not speak, did not move, her gaze darting between Rashid and Samira like someone watching a blade sway between 2 targets. The palace physician entered with the measured pace of a man who knew his presence would bend the room's attention. His robe carried the scents of sandalwood, mint, and the faint metallic tang of his instruments. He knelt by the pool of spilled broth, inhaled once, then dipped a slender glass rod into the liquid. Bringing it to his nose, his brow furrowed. "Beneath the saffron and cardamom," he said, his tone grave, "there is henbane, powdered, carefully measured. A slow poison, enough to cloud the mind, weaken the body, make decisions questionable. The words fell into the room like a stone into still water, sending invisible ripples through every person present. Rashid's eyes found Samira's across the space, and in that moment, no words were needed. This was not an attempt at murder. It was an attempt at discrediting, at eroding strength in the eyes of the council. Samira's voice was calm, cutting through the heavy silence. The cook swallowed. The name seemed to thicken the air. Rashid's voice dropped, edged with steel. Farid was dragged in moments later. The fine silk of his vest creased, his turban slightly askew. He tried to stand tall, but his eyes flicked nervously from the guards to the copper pot. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "I brought the spices as I always do." Samira stepped forward, her gaze fixed on him. "Yet today, you placed the jar on the far counter instead of the usual shelf, left without staying for the tasting, and arrived when the cook's back was turned." Farid's voice faltered. Rashid asked, stepping closer, the weight of command in his voice. The pause was brief but damning. "Lady Hannah's." The name lingered in the air like smoke, and then, as though she had been waiting for the exact moment her presence would matter most, Lady Hannah entered. She swept into the room draped in crimson silk that shimmered like the desert horizon at sunset. Her gold earrings swayed with each step, catching the light in flashes. She moved without hurry, yet with the deliberate grace of a falcon circling its prey. "I hear there has been an incident," she said, her tone smooth as polished marble. Her gaze slid to Samira, and a faint smile touched her lips. "Not spoken," Samira replied, voice calm but precise. Lady Hannah's smile deepened, though it held no warmth. "In this palace, my dear, words are arrows, but arrows break when they meet the right shield." Rashid's voice cut through the charged air. "Until this matter is resolved, Farid will remain in custody." Hannah inclined her head slightly, the movement slow, her gaze never leaving Samira's. She turned and left, her departure leaving a vacuum that the room's silence rushed to fill. When the door closed, Rashid looked to Samira. "I have done more than that," she said, her voice steady as stone. Outside, the night had settled over the palace, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and the salt of the distant sea. The city murmured beyond the walls, and somewhere, the call to prayer began, a sound that always seemed to signal both endings and beginnings. Samira lingered in the doorway, her mind already moving beyond this night. She understood what the kitchen had become, not just the site of an attempted sabotage, but the first battlefield in a longer war. If she wished to protect Rashid, if she wished to keep her own position from being swept away like footprints in the desert sand, she would need to move faster, think sharper, and strike before her enemies even knew she had drawn the bow. Because here, in the heart of the Gulf, games never ended. They simply changed players, and those who hesitated became the story others told.